I'm Soldofsky, and I'm going to read a few poems from my most recent collection titled In the Buddha Factory from Truman State University Press. And I'm going to read one or two poems from a new collection which is going to be called Charts for the End of Days. So this first poem refers to Melville, but it's a different version of the Melville than the one that wrote about whales. This is one, I would imagine, because Melville died in poverty, that he was gathered along with a bunch of homeless people who inhabit the San Jose State University Library, where I often find myself having to go. So I placed him there. And this is kind of a mashup, as several of the poems I will read today are. Melville. You cannot loiter long in this downtown library branch without being asked what you're looking for. I said, I always wanted to read the lives of the squids. The librarian mentioned that there were 3 volumes. She looked me over like I was an olive in a root beer glass. I'd rather do origami than read about the construction of innocence in the 19th century. I'm not a formalist, but I can read inscriptions on a crypt as well as the next guy. I'm tired of living on salt pork and whale fat, bored with looking into the dead mouths of coelacanths. She looked at me as if I had taken something unspeakable out of my pocket. She said she could look up mollusks on her computer. Cephalopods, I corrected. That's when she explained that there was a prejudice in this district, dependent as it was on the bovine economy. Excuse me, I said. I said the truth was I had recently fractured my knee, which caused me to speak on several topics at once. What was I saying just now? She looked so sweet then, so terribly thin. I barely stifled an impulse I suddenly had to touch her ear. I'm sorry, I said, but I had lost my thought. As she tilted forward, I could see her forehead's waxy gleam, her pasty white neck, the light slipping down the modest slope of a breast. Oh, I was lost. By the time I came to my senses, I realized I was standing inside a whirlpool. There was no way I could go back to what I had been doing, parsing sentences, doing piecework. I had to shape up. I'd been drowning in pages of water, living in a group home. Surely I knew that the truth slanted. What sad harpoon had I lashed myself to? On what bone had I been gnawing? I had consented to the doctrine of filth only because what else could one do? How could I have not seen the taxi cabs idling, their signs turned off? It was time to go by then. The air was being shut off a little at a time. There was a lance in my side. She was saying something. She was telling me a fable about obedience that I didn't already know. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read a poem about Wordsworth in Santa Cruz. That's the title. After having seen the Lake District, I was thinking, well, geez, at least the time I saw it, it was sunny and warm. It looked so much like Mendocino. It seemed like maybe Santa Cruz County. And suddenly it occurred to me that maybe Wordsworth and his sister Dorothy might be hanging out at the Pacific Garden Mall along with all the other itinerants, sort of doing their thing. So here's Wordsworth in Santa Cruz. Before the flood, he lived on Love Creek Road, and with his sister read tarot, flipping cards on a red velvet scarf outside cafes along the Pacific Garden Mall. From the point, he watched surfers in black neoprene paddling out, sleek as otters, lining up to catch the head-high sets, and get pummeled in Steamer Lane where the waves break both right and left, and in the backwash, the water sprays up through itself like smoke, as if the bay were composed of cold blue flame that smolders against the rocks. In the parking lot, there'd be the usual dross of VW vans and rancheros, people half undressed, toweling off, brushing sand out of their suits. Overhead, a flock of cormorants, winged migrants, trolling for fish or garbage. At dusk, he'd head back to his cottage, a garage behind the boardwalk, where the wind had scrawled obscenities in the dirt in Spanish. Swallows making wide blue arcs would dive under the eaves. He'd sit out through the poverty of the evening and listen to the voices overflow from the amusement park, like the smell of cotton candy. Hungry, he'd wander over to the refreshment stand, order French fries and a Coke, only to discover that the word for starlight had vanished, as had other words consigned to spontaneity's leafy passages. All thoughts confined to memory, which the more he tried to access, the more it seemed he'd forgotten. Though there were times, walking home, when he could almost remember golden flowers in the wallpaper, nights when his friends came over with a jug of Carlo Rossi, and they'd talk almost until dawn, the experience, even as he was having it, gone, melted away, not an imprint preserved in the daylight's famished vernacular. I'm going to read the title poem of this book, called In the Buddha Factory. The poem came out of a trip that I got to take to Zhejiang province in China to attend the Zhejiang Provincial Writers Association's international conference. And I was one of two Americans participating. And at the conference, they took us to Mount Tiantai after the conference. Mount Tiantai is the site of the founding of Zen Buddhism, the oldest Zen monastery, or the first Zen monastery, really. But before they took us up to the monastery, which was very active, monks were there, and pilgrims from around the world, they took us to a Buddha factory, a manufacturing plant for Buddha statues, where they were building the world, at the time, the world's largest Buddha, which is the cover of my book. It's a 48-meter tall statue. So coming back to the United States and coming back to some hard times, all that experience kind of came back up.
Can I get something?
In the Buddha factory, form without a body, body without form, where we start and where we end. You remember ascending the hillside through the green expanse of afternoon, mist dripping off the ganglia of mulberry, a few pink blossoms already exploding, quavering in the low wind. In the temple, the abbot fished in his robes for his cell phone, surprised at such ringing in the world. In a cloud at the top of the mountain, you found a staircase leading down to a fat statue leafed with golden moss, mouth open, laughing. So difficult to tell what is genuine. You saw hundreds like that one arranged for display in the showroom, rows of them in various postures, washed in the commodious tinctures of commerce. Bodhisattvas, male and female, some with red fingernails, waiting to be sold to resorts in Las Vegas. Nearby, the world's largest Buddha is being assembled in a shed like an airplane hangar. Its nose about the size of a Learjet. You can't help but bow and mutter prayers. It's good business, the manufacturer says, his own father a believer. You couldn't know you were here to prepare for the long silence ahead, when someone close to you labors for breath, flesh dimmed, and insolvent spirit, the nurse feeding him morphine, an ampule an hour, one eye lolling open as if to see beyond the light. Then there's you, rubbing a spot on the top of your head, looking away at a normal face on TV, to distract yourself from death's disheveled taxonomy. Outside, in the jaggy water, in the marina, boats loll at anchor, repeating the sea's endless detachment from the weight of its occupants. This is a new poem. It's going to be in my next collection, Charts for the End of Days. This is a drought poem, and this one takes place in North Lake Tahoe, where there's a bear problem. In the cabin that we rented, we found out that the bears were breaking in and going through the refrigerator. They'd been in our cabin twice, and so there were bear alarms. And of course that triggered the idea that maybe the bears belong there and we didn't. So this is a poem called Bear. I like one-word titles. Bear. The bear comes by every night to forage for garbage. Drought has made them smarter. This year, the gooseberries did not ripen, and so these bears are starved except for attention. They break into cabins, crashing through doors like drunken teenagers to loot the refrigerator, even when they're occupied, say, by bridesmaids who come downstairs half hungover, startled out of their faces to find them at the kitchen counter, slurping up boysenberry crumble and beer, pulling down the spice rack, and with their butts turning on the burners. The smell of gas gusting through the broken window glass brings the neighbors who come running, unsure whether to chase or be chased by them in their baggy, honey-colored coats. They're so thirsty they would tear open rocks like coconuts to drink whatever's in there, because every rill in the high country has become a dribble of dust even before the solstice. The bear comes by every night, suffering the need to live among us. We, who often become frightened and forget how to use punctuation. The bear comes by every night, knowing what the point is. You see them waiting at dumpsters behind Save Mart, watching the clerks lock up. You hear them huffing in the shadows by McDonald's, taking turns, shooting dice, practicing their guttural English. There's never been more of them at the lakeside. Fires have burned them out of their dens. They can't sleep anymore through the winter, too warm. They're hot in that awful stringy fur they long to shed. Closed, chased through strip malls by Forest Service cops, they slide between buildings, sneaking onto beaches where they stand to greet us, holding up their big snarly hands. The bear comes by every night. You suspect by now they've learned to outsmart us. We who think how cool it is to live so lavishly, vacationing in our exclusive human skin.